Dan Comiskey here. Thanks again, NISA, for sending me these wonderful questions. What a great opportunity to interact with the audience. Something that I miss with the virtual speaking. To be honest, I love being able to present the message. And I also would like to be able to have that interaction before and after the presentation and to see the reaction that I'm getting in the crowd. So this gives me an opportunity to get some feedback in terms of what I can add, and it also allows me to answer some questions with my base knowledge. My first question that I've got is, what piece of advice would you give to somebody who's starting off in their career where it seems difficult to disrupt a space that is this is how we've been doing it mindset? You're starting off your career and you're a leader, and you may not feel like a leader yet, but you're a leader, and you the way you have to approach your career is that you're leading. You're either leading or misleading, and so everything that you do, the thing you need to know about this is that if you're coaching safety, which is what you're doing as a leader, if you're coaching safety, there's three things about coaching that you have to understand. Three effective keys to coaching, okay? Number one is lead by example, right? Lead by example. Number two is you need to understand the player's motivation, okay? That's number two. You need to understand the player's motivation. Obviously, your individuals are not players. This is the real life scenario, but they're still workers, and it's their motivation. You have to understand what their motivation is. And number three, you need to have a coaching system. The coaching system that I always refer to, and the one that I've really found useful while I was in the field, and then since then, is essentially a continuum-based coaching system. So for that, I'm going to ask you to click the link below. You'll be able to see it, and you can go to, there's a 10-minute video on exactly what that is, but just an understanding of what the continuum-based coaching system is you've got a spectrum of people that you're working with, and they start as rookies and they end up as old vets. Okay, and so as rookies, they're low in maturity, they're low in development, they're low in skill set. Lower than they will be as old vets. So even if they're just competing against themselves, they're low in those three areas. They're low in a lot of areas. Rookies don't know, they don't know pickles from pineapples, right? Like, it's just the way it is. And so what you have to understand is that when you start with a clean slate and you don't know anything, and you go all the way to the side of the spectrum where you know a lot, and sometimes you know just enough to be dangerous and you feel like you know everything, but you don't. And that's where you get into that kind of gray area with your old vets. Just because you're an old vet doesn't mean you're perfect either, because a lot of that is where that mindset comes from. So usually the rookies are willing to learn, and when you get into that kind of halfway mark where they're in the learning mode, you should be learning throughout the entire career, but where they've got the understanding, they've understand the basics, and they're working towards having a knowledge they can just work with, and that you can trust them to follow the safety procedures and take care of business and intervene when necessary. And it's one of those things, but then you get to that, I've always done it this way. So this is where leading by example comes in. It's not only that it comes in handy as much as that it's essential. And my favorite guy that I ever talk about in terms of leading by example is a guy named Tom Higgins. He coached me. He was my head coach in Edmonton. And I mean, we used to have, football, you have kind of a grueling schedule. You a lot of times you're traveling, you're not back till 2-3 o'clock in the morning. You're taking late flights out after games. And then if it's a short week, you've got to practice the next day. So you're back at the stadium by 10 o'clock in the morning, right? And those coaches, they put in so many hours before practice and after practice that some of them sleep at the office, and Tom was one of those guys that always brought the weather, and it was always good weather. Every time you saw him, he was smiling. Every time you asked him how he was, he had the same word that he would say. He would just say, excellent. He'd give you this beautiful smile. And it's so you knew exactly what you could expect from him. You knew exactly who he was. You knew exactly what you could expect at all times. That's one of those attributes as a leader that I took seriously. That if anybody is ever, in a situation where I'm leading them or trying to lead them, whether it's in my family, at work, or my kids, or anything, if you're always bringing the weather and it's always good weather, they know exactly what to expect, and it gives a trust, right? Leading by example means that you're not the one who has to be intervened on for not wearing safety gear. Leading by example means that you're not the one who has to be intervened on for following procedures properly, for making sure that you intervene. Like, you shouldn't be seen walking by an unsafe act if you want to be a safety leader. Leading by example means that you're asking people how they're doing and you're actually listening for the answer, right? It builds this trust, okay? And when I say you're asking them what they're doing, you're listening for the answer, that goes into the next step, which is really understanding individual motivation. Okay, so when you're trying to figure out who your players are, who your people are, when you're trying to figure out who the individuals on your team are, understanding what they like, what they don't like, what they find valuable, what they find important, understanding those things, you're allowed to take notes. You're allowed to actually try to remember things. My 18-year-old daughter does this. She takes notes on people's names because she doesn't feel like she's good with names. But if I have to ask her, she always knows the names. Understand their motivation. The guy I knew best about this was Hugh Campbell. He the first time I met him, he had me in his office for a half hour, and he let me know in that meeting two things. Number one, he let me know that he was the GM and I was the player, and because I kept on trying to tell him what we were going to talk about, he wasn't interested in doing that. He just looked at me very calmly and said, "You have to understand, I am the GM and you're the player, and that's not what we're here to talk about. We'll get to that in a minute." I think I wanted to talk about money, and he wanted to talk about what I was going to do after football. Well, once he understood that I wanted to have a career after football that involved public speaking, it allowed him to understand my motivations for a lot of things that I was doing on the team. It allowed him to set me up with different opportunities to speak at leadership conferences, at leadership meetings for companies, for oil and gas companies out of Edmonton. It's one of the reasons that I actually was able to launch a career doing it, because he understood who I was. He understood my motivation, and him understanding that gave me a lot of respect for him, but it made me take him seriously. Okay, so we've got our 3 effective keys to coaching, right? Lead by example, understand the individual's motivation, and you have to use a continuum-based coaching system. You can click on the link below to get a video on the continuum-based coaching system. And the other 2, I think I've explained fairly well. If you have any other questions about any of this, I'm happy to answer them by email. I'm happy to have a conversation. You can schedule me right from my website for a conversation. You'll be able to actually see when I'm available. Yeah, if you feel like hearing more of this, I'm now starting to create more and more content on YouTube, because I feel like this is a valuable way to kind of get things out there. So please subscribe, hit like, leave a comment, whatever you'd like to do. Thanks very much. I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate the fact that you guys brought me in. And next is question number 2. Have a great day. Hello, my friends at TC Energy. As per our introduction, this is question number 2. How do you keep yourself motivated, especially when you are up against things that are outside of your control or seem insurmountable? And this is a great question, and it really goes along with overcoming adversity, because what you really have to look at is the feeling that you're in when you feel like things are insurmountable. You feel like they're out of your control, and that starts. It actually makes you think with your reptilian brain, right? The older part of your brain that's more reactionary, the part that gets angry with people, and you feel your blood pressure rising, and you want to overreact, and you have to really think about that, and you have to control those impulses, because it's the more evolved part of your brain that actually allows you to overcome these things in the proper way. And it's not only about having dignity, it's about getting the best results you can possibly get, and not losing yourself to the situation. So really, there's 3 parts to this that I want to talk about. Number one of the things that I've learned over the years is that when I am getting daily exercise, I know this sounds very generic, but just stick with me for a second. When I'm getting daily exercise, it's really hard to throw me off my game. If I'm doing something every day, and in the last couple of years, I've moved more towards 2 parts of daily exercise a day. Part of the issue I did that was because I had a weight problem, but what I discovered was that it wasn't about my weight or even my appearance as much as it was about my energy level and my and my emotion. If I don't go to the gym, frankly, my wife notices by the end of the day, and it's not because I suddenly gain a whole bunch of weight. It's because my attitude isn't the same. I'm not as happy. I'm not as I'm just not as joyful. It's one of those things. There's some things that exercise does for you that people don't always consider. The increased blood flow to your heart. Now, your heart is the organ that supplies your whole body with blood, obviously. But when you exercise your heart, it means that it can take more hits, right? And it also releases all those endorphins that you keep on hearing about on all the reels and all that kind of stuff. And I get it. It's always out there, but those endorphins affect your mood. So that's number one. Number two, I find that exercise really points out your dependencies, and it points out your vices. If you have a vice to stay up late and watch old movies, and you do that during the week because you're depressed or you're scared, a lot of times people just put off getting up the next day so they stay up late. If your vice is alcohol, or if your vice is drugs, even if it's legal stuff, but especially if it's not, I mean, people have all sorts of dependencies right now. And when you get daily exercise, it not only points those out to you so you understand, that there is a vice there. For instance, let's talk about smoking and walking, right? If you smoke a pack of cigarettes or a half pack of cigarettes or 10 cigarettes a day, it'll affect your wind. And so it'll point it out to you. So it's one of those things that just kind of convicts you, right? It teaches you what you need to fix. If it's alcohol and it keeps you're tired all the time with alcohol, right? Like, I mean, it's just one of those things that just zaps your energy. You don't have as much, you can't be as effective. You don't have as much energy to do things. So exercise allows you to see those, and then doing the exercise actually replaces the habit in the time frame that you would do the habit a lot of times. But on top of that, the endorphins that you finally realize that you're getting from the exercise actually change the way you can react to situations. So in terms of overcoming sudden changes or long changes that are taking a long time to overcome, that are taking a long time to adapt to, whether they're personal or at work, exercise is key, man. Exercise is key. I'm just a firm believer. You have to also, number two, you need to ask yourself a very simple question. The question is this situation that I'm trying to overcome or survive, is this caused by something I'm doing or not doing? If it's caused by something I'm doing or not doing, then what is it? Now, you might not like the answer to this question. And this is an old tactic. I learned it from Jordan Peterson. I can't remember which book or which study session, but it doesn't matter. You ask yourself that question, and it's not always an easy question to ask yourself. It's certainly not a question where you always like the answer, because when you realize that you're really doing something stupid in your life, then you want to change it. You become convicted to change it. So if it is something that you can control by your behavior, by doing something or not doing something, then you have to look at how that works. And this is where we get kind of further out there and talk about habit creation, habit change. I do have, lots of material on that. Please feel free to reach out to me. Love to talk to people about that. Love to coach that, frankly. But I don't have time for it today. If it's not something that you can control, if it's something that is outside of your realm of control, okay, then you have to accept it. You have to accept it, and you have to move along. And my dad used to say, he was, whenever I was really upset about something that I couldn't control, he would say, okay, now move along, act as if you're normal. And I always thought I was kind of normal, but apparently he didn't. But it was one of those things I always remembered, and it was so accurate. You have to move along. You have to get through it. Pondering on it and thinking about it and obsessing over bad situations just doesn't help. Now, it may be that you have somebody that you can reach out to for assistance if it's outside of your control in terms of how to adapt to it. Maybe it's counseling through work. Maybe it's somebody that can help you make a change if they have control. But I mean, if you're talking about something that's outside of the realm of your control in terms of organizationally, you have to work within that system, and you have to move along and continue your work and trying to make sure people get home safe. That's part of your deal. That's what you're there to do. And the third thing is going to be a little controversial, crazily enough for me. You need to pray, you need to read the Bible, and you need to surrender. And in doing those things, in praying and reading the Bible, you can learn, people want to say a lot of things about this, but the reality is prayer and reading the Bible teach you God's will. And when you actually, and my 18-year-old son knows this, when you actually read the Bible and follow the rules that are in the Bible and live your life that way, a lot of the mistakes that you might have made won't happen because you just start following those rules. And in surrendering, what I mean is you have to surrender to the understanding that you're not perfect. You have to surrender the understanding the world isn't perfect. And you have to give that control that you want so bad because it's outside of your control. To me, what I do, and I would invite you to do it too, there's peace in it. I give that to God. Sometimes things are just God-sized problems. Anyway, that's answer number 2, and hope you stick with me and come through with answer number 3. Have a great day. Hello, my friends. This is your third and final question. How can we all support the goal of safety when we work in such diverse roles? So, when I first read this question, I thought we were talking about diversity and inclusion. And the second time I read it, or the third time I read it, I realized that we may be talking about diversity in terms of roles at work with which we fill different responsibilities. And the great news is the answer is exactly the same. When we're talking about safe production, we're talking about providing a product for our end clients that is, positive and high quality and in a timely fashion. But above all else, we're not jeopardizing people's lives, and it's done safely without injuring or killing anybody. The beautiful thing about it is when you prioritize safety properly, you're actually prioritizing quality and productivity as well, because what you're doing is you're finding the safest and best systems and putting them in place with your workers. And if you're in the field working, you're finding the safest and most productive way to accomplish your task. And when we all have that whole same goal, that same end goal, we have the same end in mind. We need to get to that safe end of the day and that safe end of the quarter and then the safe end of the project. Well, that goal is what unifies us. So although your roles are different and maybe even your backgrounds are different, it doesn't matter what's different because the goal is what unifies us. And I think that you're doing a great job already of prioritizing this. And I think Safety Week and all the effort that your leadership team put in place to have you understand, that is high priority. It's a value of the company, obviously. And we know that things are changing with TC Energy, and we know that we're looking to evolve that culture to understand, how exactly to accomplish that goal. I think it's safe to say that when you don't know what to do, if you start with that goal in mind, then you're all on the same team. And if that's the goal you have to draw on when you're doing an intervention on somebody, whether they're in a different role than you or the same role in you, whether they're a different person, different kind of person, different culturally, different, whatever, that goal is what unifies you. And I don't mean to sound corny, but it is that one thing. It's that one thing I talked about in my presentation. It's that end goal is the most important thing. Thanks very much for the questions. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. Loved working with you. And please don't be shy. If you feel like hearing more from me, I'm going to be producing more and more content. Please subscribe. You can always go to my website at www.dancomiskey.com. And, I do all sorts of coaching. I offer different stuff, and I'm happy to help you in any possible way that I can in terms of reaching that goal of safety. Thanks very much. Have a great day.